The story does not begin with triumph. It begins with silence, a silence so deep it seemed the earth itself was holding its breath. Long before the world heard the words, "Unbelievable move. Ibrahim Traoré builds road on tires." Long before, Trump's face froze in disbelief before the cameras. There was only the sound of rubber. Old rubber. Worn, cracked, forgotten tires, dragged across dust by calloused hands, carried by children whose feet had never touched smooth pavement, stacked by soldiers who had no blueprint, no budget, and no certainty that what they were building even mattered. It was madness, they said. A joke. A cruel trick that history would remember only as another African failure. But Ibrahim Traoré saw something else. He saw a future stitched together by the discarded fragments of the past. If you find this story amusing, then like, share, and subscribe. A rumor in the villages of Burkina Faso that the captain was not building a palace, not buying fleets of cars, not hiding gold, but collecting tires, thousands of them. Tires that had rolled through deserts, through cities, through wars. Tires burned in riots, tires buried in junkyards, tires abandoned by the very powers that once ruled his people. At first, the people laughed. "What is he doing?" they asked. "You cannot build a road out of rubber. A road must be of stone, of asphalt, of wealth." But Traoré said nothing. He only watched as the rubber piled high, black mountains of discarded circles, like the ghosts of a forgotten age. At night, villagers claimed to see him standing alone at the edge of the piles, staring into them as if reading the future written in the grooves. Some whispered he was mad. Others whispered he was chosen. All agreed. Something strange was happening. And in Washington, a man named Donald Trump was shown a satellite photograph of it. He laughed, a laugh that filled the Situation Room. "This? Tires? This is what they call progress?" he said. "Tell your people. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. They'll sink into the mud before they drive a single mile." The laughter echoed across oceans. But in Burkina Faso, the work continued. What the world did not see was the danger. For in every whisper of laughter, there was also the hiss of betrayal. Generals inside his circle who wanted the contracts for themselves. Businessmen who wanted foreign asphalt deals. Agents who reported to embassies in secret. They all asked the same question: why build with tires? And when they found no answer, they decided Traoré himself must be destroyed. Meetings were held, in dark rooms. Promises were made. "The captain must fall," they whispered. "This road is not just foolish. It is dangerous. It will unite the poor. It will awaken something we cannot control." And so, while villagers dragged tires by hand, enemies sharpened their knives in the dark. Meanwhile, the land itself groaned with hunger. The fields had dried. The rains had failed. Mothers boiled stones in water to silence their children's cries. The country needed food, medicine, hope. Instead, its leader was demanding tires. Madness, the press declared. Insanity, the world agreed. But still, the people obeyed, not because they believed in rubber, but because they believed in him. They had seen him before, in uniform, standing unflinching when others fled. They had heard his words, that Africa must build with its own hands, not beg for scraps. And so they carried the tires, not for the road, but for the man who dared to dream of one. And then it appeared. One morning, under a burning sun, the first stretch of the tire road was laid. 1,000 tires cut, pressed, bound together with iron and clay, forming a surface black as night, stretching across the dust. It looked absurd, like a scar across the earth, but when a child stepped onto it, barefoot, he did not stumble. He did not cut his feet on stone. He walked smooth, silent, free. Soon others followed, women carrying water, farmers carrying tools, soldiers marching in unison, and slowly, the laughter turned to silence. The road was real. From the air, it looked like a black vein cutting across the desert, pulsing with life. A vein the world had not expected, a vein that fed the heart of a dream. In Europe, analysts debated. In Washington, Trump mocked again. "This isn't a road," he sneered. "It's a playground. Let them have their fun." But one advisor warned him, "Sir, the road is growing. Every day, another mile. Every day, more people walk upon it. We don't know what it means, but it means something. Trump waved him off. But somewhere, a seed of unease was planted. For history does not always turn on weapons, or wealth, or armies. Sometimes, history turns on a symbol. And the road of tires was no longer just rubber. It was defiance. But defiance has a cost. As the road stretched, so did the shadows. Supplies went missing, workers disappeared, fires broke out in the night. The smell of burning rubber filled the air, not from the road but from saboteurs torching the piles. Traoré himself narrowly escaped an ambush on his convoy, and still, he pressed forward. Why? His advisors begged. Because, he said at last, his voice low. Every tire is a story. Every tire rolled once under the weight of their world. Now it will carry ours. And so, mile by mile, the road stretched further, black and endless, until it seemed the earth itself was being stitched together by circles of resilience. The people no longer laughed. They no longer questioned. They simply walked. By the thousands, they walked upon the road, carrying nothing but their burdens and hope. It was no longer a construction project. It was a pilgrimage. And in that moment, when the first 1,000 marched upon it, the air changed. Something unseen rippled across the land. A signal, a warning. Africa was not dead. Africa was not silent. Africa was moving. In New York, a live broadcast played in the golden room of a tower that bore Trump's name. The camera showed Ibrahim Traoré walking alone upon the road of tires, stretching into the horizon, a line of firelight marking its edges. Behind him, thousands followed. Trump leaned forward, frowning. For the first time, he did not laugh, and as the screen flickered, the world itself seemed to pause, breathless, waiting to see what would come next. Because no one believed a road of tires could change history. Until it did. What Ibrahim Traoré did next would shock the world. The first stretch of the tire road lay beneath the burning sun, black and strange against the pale earth. To outsiders it seemed a spectacle, a curiosity fit for mockery. But to those who had placed each tire, it was a miracle born of hunger and despair. They did not build it because they believed in rubber. They built it because they believed in Ibrahim Traoré. Yet belief alone would not keep them alive. The villages around the road still starved. Crops withered, rivers shrank, and the markets overflowed with prices no mother could pay. Children wandered barefoot, their bellies empty, their laughter replaced with silence. Still, each morning they dragged new tires from junkyards, from abandoned mines, from rusted trucks that once belonged to the colonial companies who had bled their land dry. The rubber stank of age and oil, but under the captain's orders it became something sacred. People worked until their hands blistered, then worked more, because to refuse was to surrender to the same hopelessness that had haunted generations. But not all hands lifted tires with faith. Some lifted them while whispering. Betrayal. Within Traoré's own circle, envy festered. 3 men in particular, generals he had once trusted, sat in candlelit rooms and spoke of contracts, of money, of the old ways of power. One of them spat his words out like venom. He shames us. A captain who builds roads from trash, while we starve. The world laughs at us because of him. Another leaned closer. The people may believe now. But when the famine worsens, when the road stretches into nowhere, they will turn on him. And we will be waiting. Their knives were not yet drawn, but the plotting had begun. The road itself became a thing of mystery. At night, the villagers swore they heard it hum, a low vibration that passed through the earth like the pulse of a buried heart. Some said the tires carried voices, whispers of the cities they had once rolled through, the cries of riots, the roars of engines, the screams of war. Others said it was the ancestors speaking, bound into the rubber, pushing their people forward step by step. Whatever the truth, no one could walk the road at night without feeling watched. News of the project spread beyond borders. In Paris, polished news anchors sneered on television, calling it a primitive spectacle. In Washington, officials dismissed it as a populist distraction. And yet, the road kept growing. From a mile to 10, from 10 to 50, until it stretched across villages and fields, visible even from low-flying aircraft. Analysts tried to measure its purpose, but no report could explain why thousands of people carried tires across scorching land without pay, without food, driven only by the stubborn will of their leader. Trump was briefed again. Advisors placed photographs on his desk, endless black lines cutting across Burkina Faso, trucks piled high with rubber, villagers marching like ants. He smirked, brushing the papers aside. It's rubber. Rubber melts. Rubber burns. You think this matters? But behind his smile flickered irritation. The road had reached American intelligence briefings for a reason. Someone, somewhere, feared what it might become. Traoré himself rarely spoke of the road. He traveled to villages in silence, inspecting piles of tires, touching them like relics. He bent to speak to children, telling them the road would carry their steps long after he was gone. Yet even he carried the weight of doubt. In the solitude of night, he wondered if he was building salvation or madness. He saw his people's hollow faces, their skins stretched thin, and questioned whether tires could ever feed a child. But when despair rose, he remembered the words of Sankara. We must dare to invent the future. And so he dared, even when the future was as fragile as worn rubber beneath the sun. The road became more than a path. It became a gathering ground. Traders set up stalls along it. Musicians carved rhythms into drums of scrap metal. Elders told stories to children who sat cross-legged on the black surface. Soldiers marched its length, their boots echoing. It was alive, a place where misery and hope collided, where a starving nation began to see itself not as broken fragments, but as one. That unity terrified the world. Sanctions tightened. Foreign companies withdrew what little aid they offered. Rumors spread of rebels massing in the north, funded by invisible hands. Newspapers in Europe printed cartoons of Africans building toy roads while the continent burned. The laughter was loud, but underneath it was fear. Because what they saw was not just tires. They saw millions of people moving with one purpose, and that was something no sanction could crush. Inside the barracks, soldiers whispered among themselves. Some doubted the captain's vision. We are soldiers, not laborers, they muttered. Others defended him fiercely. We build because he fights for us, because he refuses their money, their orders. The army itself wavered, caught between loyalty and exhaustion, but still they carried tires. Each soldier who placed one onto the road knew it was more than rubber. It was defiance hammered into the earth, and then came the accidents. A convoy carrying hundreds of tires overturned in the night, flames devouring rubber until the sky itself glowed red. Sabotage was suspected, but no proof emerged. Bridges collapsed beneath trucks too heavy to cross. Workers vanished into the dark, their bodies never found. Each loss spread unease. Whispers turned into rumors, that the road was cursed, that it was built on the bones of ancestors, that it would swallow all who walked it. Traoré ignored the whispers, but the fear was real. Still the road stretched onward, like a scar across the desert, like a vein feeding an unknown heart. Each mile laid was another mile of defiance, another mile of resistance. Children who once played in dust now raced along the black surface, laughing as if the rubber itself gave them wings. Women carried water without stumbling on jagged ground. Farmers dragged carts where once there were only paths of thorns. The absurd had become useful, and usefulness became power. But power always attracts betrayal. The three generals who had once whispered now conspired openly. They wrote letters in secret, promising foreign governments contracts and concessions, if only the captain were removed. They met envoys in hotels outside the country, trading information for promises of wealth. They watched the road with cold eyes, waiting for the moment when they could claim it as their own, or burn it to ashes. One evening, Traoré stood at the edge of the road as the sun fell. The horizon glowed with fire, and behind him the line of tires stretched further than the eye could see. A journalist asked him what it meant. He answered simply, "This road is not for me. It is for the children who will walk it when I am gone. It is built from what they threw away, because that is what they made of us, trash, forgotten, but we will walk on what they despised, and they will see us rise." That night, the image of him standing alone on the road spread across social media. A man framed against the dying sun, A black road beneath his feet, endless emptiness ahead. Some called him a prophet. Others called him a fool. But the picture refused to be ignored. In the heart of New York, Trump scrolled through his phone, saw the image, and frowned. He had mocked the tires again and again, but now, millions were watching. The road that was supposed to be a joke had become a symbol, and symbols are dangerous. He tossed the phone aside, irritated, and demanded more reports. Find out where this is going. Find out how far he plans to take it. But no one could answer, because even Ibrahim Traoré himself did not know. He only knew that the road had to continue, that it could not end in dust, that if it stopped, so too would the fragile belief holding his nation together. And so, despite hunger, despite betrayal, despite mockery from the most powerful men in the world, the road of tires stretched further into the unknown, and with every mile laid, the shadow of what was coming grew darker. The road had grown beyond imagination. From the air it looked like a black serpent cutting across the earth, swallowing villages, rivers, and borders in its path. What had once been mocked as madness was now undeniable, a structure too vast to ignore. It carried not just people, but a message, one the world struggled to interpret. Was it defiance, desperation, or prophecy? No one could say. But they knew one thing. Ibrahim Traoré would not stop. The longer the road stretched, the harsher the punishment became. Foreign governments tightened sanctions, freezing what little reserves Burkina Faso had. Aid organizations withdrew, citing instability. Grain shipments vanished from ports, and fuel convoys were mysteriously delayed until farmers could not plow their fields. It was as if the world itself had conspired to suffocate a nation daring to rise. The price of rice tripled, then quadrupled. Mothers broke their bangles and sold them in markets only to return home with handfuls of flour. Fathers left their villages to find work across the border and never returned. But still the people carried tires. Hunger gnawed at their bodies. But they dragged black circles through the dust, like pilgrims carrying relics. It was no longer a construction project. It was faith carved into motion. The road had become a weapon against despair, and despair, sensing its enemy, struck back. With fury, inside the barracks, loyalty fractured. Soldiers murmured that they had signed up to fight enemies, not to haul rubber. Others whispered of rebels gathering strength in the north, funded by shadows, equipped with weapons that no local blacksmith could have forged. Skirmishes erupted. On the outskirts, villages burned in the night, and the faint hope born on the road trembled. Every battle felt less like a clash of armies and more like an attempt to strangle the road itself before it reached the heart of the nation. The three generals who had conspired in candlelit rooms now grew bolder. They met foreign envoys openly, their promises written in coded letters that crossed borders in diplomatic pouches. They fed the press rumors that Traoré was building a cult road, that he was sacrificing the nation's survival for vanity. Their words carried weight because they were not entirely lies. Children were dying of hunger while tires were still being laid. Families fled their homes to camp along the road, believing it would carry them somewhere better, only to find themselves stranded between hunger and hope. The generals pointed to these scenes and whispered, "This is his failure." But every time despair swelled, the road answered back. When famine struck, caravans of villagers walked the road, sharing scraps of food among strangers. When rebels burned villages, survivors carried their belongings onto the road, where others gave them shelter. The road itself became a sanctuary, a place where the forgotten found each other. Traoré knew this was the power his enemies feared. Not the rubber, not the miles, but the unity rising from the black surface. Yet his resolve was tested. Reports arrived daily of deaths, betrayals, losses. One night, his closest aide asked him, "Captain, is this worth it? They are starving. They are dying. Must they still carry tires?" Traoré did not answer immediately. He stared at the horizon, where the road vanished into the dark, and finally said, "If we stop now, they will have died for nothing. If we finish it, they will live in a world that remembers them." His voice cracked as he spoke, for even he was not certain. But the people believed because he did not break. Meanwhile, Trump could not escape the road. Every intelligence briefing carried updates. Every satellite image revealed new miles. Every advisor spoke of the strange phenomenon in West Africa. At first he had mocked it, then he had ignored it, but now it irritated him like a stone in his shoe. How could a man with no money, no machines, and no permission from the powers of the world build something that refused to die? Trump demanded answers his advisors could not give. Why tires? Why does it matter? Why won't it collapse? Their silence only deepened his rage. And then came the propaganda. Anonymous broadcasts spread across the region, claiming the road was cursed, that walking upon it meant giving your soul to a false prophet. Radio stations whispered that the tires carried disease, that they poisoned the land. Leaflets appeared in markets, warning villagers that the captain was building a path not to salvation, but to death. Fear began to creep back into the people's hearts, and for the first time since the road began, doubt returned. Sabotage followed. Entire shipments of tires disappeared overnight. Explosions ripped apart storage yards. Columns of smoke rose above villages as fire consumed stacks of rubber. The air choked with black ash. One morning, a section of the road itself was found. Torn apart, every tire slashed, every joint ripped open as though by claws. People gathered in silence, staring at the wound, wondering if the dream had ended. Traoré arrived at dawn. He walked slowly onto the ruined stretch, his boots sinking into the broken rubber. The crowd waited for him to curse or weep, but he did neither. Instead, he knelt, picked up a shredded tire and held it above his head. "They can burn it, they can tear it, but they cannot stop it," he said, his voice carrying over the silence. "We will build again and again, until this road reaches the future." The people erupted in cries, their fear shattered by the stubborn fire in his voice. That night, they worked until their hands bled, relaying the road that had been destroyed. Generals watched with growing unease. Their plots had failed, their sabotage undone. Yet they did not stop. They whispered of final moves, of striking at the captain himself before the road reached the capital. Their knives sharpened, their patience thinned, and the storm of betrayal gathered like thunder on the horizon. The famine worsened. Entire families collapsed along the road, their bodies too weak to continue. Graves were dug beside the rubber, marked not with stones but with the very tires they had carried. Yet even in death, the march continued. The sight of corpses along the black path did not drive people away. It hardened them. They whispered to their children, "Do not step off. This road is our blood now. Walk, even if you must crawl." And the children walked. Trump's advisors grew alarmed. They told him that the road was no longer just a construction project, but a movement. That the image of thousands walking barefoot on rubber had spread across Africa. That leaders in other nations feared it might inspire their own people. Trump sneered but said nothing. For the first time, his silence betrayed unease. By now the road had taken on an aura of mystery. Pilgrims claimed to see visions when they walked upon it. Shadows of ancestors marching beside them, spirits whispering promises of freedom. Old women touched the tires and said they could feel the heartbeat of the land itself. Even skeptics admitted there was something uncanny about the way the road endured heat, storms, sabotage, and hunger, as though it carried a force greater than human hands. And then came the turning point. A massive gathering was announced. Tens of thousands would march the road together, stretching it further than ever before, carrying torches into the night. It was meant to be a celebration, a demonstration of unity. But for the generals, it was the perfect opportunity. They conspired to strike then, to ignite chaos in the very heart of the march. The night came. Under a dark sky, the road glowed with firelight, as thousands carried torches along its endless length. The sound of their feet was like thunder rolling through the earth. From the air it looked like a river of fire flowing across black stone. Traoré marched at the front, his face lit by the flames, his steps steady, his silence heavy with defiance. Behind him, men, women, and children moved as one, their chants rising into the night. The world watched. Cameras broadcast the march across continents. Analysts spoke of mass delusion, of dangerous symbolism, but their voices trembled. Even in the living rooms of the powerful, the image of thousands marching barefoot on rubber could not be dismissed. And in a golden tower in New York, Donald Trump sat before the screen, leaning forward, his face hard. The laughter that once filled his mouth was gone. He stared, unblinking, as the road of tires stretched further into the dark, as Ibrahim Traoré led his people into a future no one could yet see. What happened that night would decide everything. For the generals had chosen it as their moment, and the clash between betrayal and defiance was inevitable. The road of tires had carried them to this point, but what lay ahead was not just a path of rubber. It was the test of a nation's soul. And as the torches flickered against the night sky, the world held its breath, knowing that the moment of confrontation had come. The night of fire and rubber had begun with unity, but shadows lurked beneath the torchlight. The march stretched for miles, the people's voices rising in chants that rolled like thunder across the dark horizon. Yet hidden among them were men who did not chant, men whose eyes glinted with malice, their steps timed with betrayal. The boar. 3 generals had chosen this night for their strike, and they had not come unprepared. As the torches illuminated the endless black path, the trap was set. Explosives hidden beneath piles of tires, rifles smuggled in under sacks of grain, saboteurs, waiting in the darkness beyond the march. The air itself felt heavy, as though the night was holding its breath. Traoré walked at the front, steady, unyielding, but in the shadows behind him, knives sharpened in silence. The first explosion shattered the chance. A section of the road erupted into fire, rubber hurling into the air like black rain. Screams tore through the march as men, women, and children stumbled in the chaos. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers raised their weapons, and the fire's glow painted the night in an infernal hue. Panic spread like wildfire, and the saboteurs moved in, their rifles cutting the dark with sudden flashes. For a moment, it seemed the dream was over. The march dissolved into terror, the road consumed by flame, the people scattering in fear. The generals had chosen well. They had not attacked the palace or the barracks. They had struck at the road itself, at the very heart of the dream. But, in the chaos, a figure stood unmoved. Traoré did not run, did not hide. He climbed a mound of tires, his silhouette framed against the fire, his voice rising above the screams. "Stand your ground," he roared. "This road is ours. Do not abandon it." His words cut through panic like steel. Slowly, the fleeing turned back. Men shielded their families. Women raised their torches higher. Children clung to the rubber, as if it were their only anchor. The road, though burning, refused to die. The saboteurs pressed harder, their bullets tearing through the night, but soldiers loyal to Traoré answered back. Gunfire rattled across the road as flames rose higher. Tire by tire, the battlefield turned into a labyrinth of fire and smoke. Yet amid the chaos, the people did not scatter far. They circled back, forming human walls along the road, protecting the wounded, shielding the fire from spreading. What should have been a rout became defiance. The generals watched from the ridge, their faces pale in the glow. This was not how it was supposed to unfold. They had expected collapse, panic, surrender. Instead, they saw a people who clung to the road with their lives, as though the rubber itself had fused with their blood. "He will not last," one muttered. "He is just one man." But even as they spoke, Traoré's shadow loomed larger against the flames, his voice unbroken, his figure almost mythic in the chaos. And then came the march of the children. A line of boys and girls no older than 10, barefoot, carrying small tires on their heads. Their faces smeared with ash, their eyes lit with firelight. They walked straight onto the burning section of the road, laying their tires down to rebuild even as bullets whistled past them. The crowd gasped, soldiers hesitated, even saboteurs faltered. It was madness, or it was faith beyond fear. One by one, others followed, laying tires upon fire, stamping out flames with bare feet, bleeding but unyielding. In that moment, the road began to rebuild itself before the world's eyes. Trump watched it unfold on screens thousands of miles away. At first, his expression was one of smug certainty. "It's over," he muttered as the explosion lit the night. But then he saw the figure rising against the flames, heard the chants, returning, watched children carrying tires into fire. His face froze. What is this?" he whispered. Advisors shifted uncomfortably. their silence more damning than words. For the first time, the man who had mocked, who had ridiculed, who had dismissed, was speechless. Back on the road, the climax unfolded. The generals, realizing their strike was failing, moved into the chaos themselves. Surrounded by loyalists and traitors alike, they charged into the march, seeking Traoré's blood. It became a confrontation not of armies, but of souls. Under firelight and smoke, amid screams and chants, the three generals faced the captain they had betrayed. "You have doomed this nation," one spat, his pistol raised. "You will burn with it." Traoré stood unflinching. "I do not burn alone. I burn with my people, and from fire we rise." His words echoed even as bullets flew. Loyal soldiers threw themselves between him and the traitors, blood soaking the tires, but still he did not fall. The battle raged around him, a storm of betrayal and defiance colliding upon the black road. Then, in the moment of greatest chaos, something unexplainable happened. The fire that had consumed the tires began to die, not from water, not from sand, but from the sheer weight of bodies stamping, rebuilding, refusing. The road that had been torn apart moments before began to re-emerge, tire by tire, like a phoenix rising from its ashes. By dawn, what was meant to be its grave had become its rebirth. The generals were gone, some dead, others vanished into the night. Their plots had failed. Their betrayal was swallowed by the very road they sought to destroy. The march continued, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. And Ibrahim Traoré, scarred by the night yet unyielding, walked at its head, the road stretching behind him like a black river of defiance. From the towers of the powerful to the villages of the forgotten, the image burned itself into history. A man and his people, building a road of tires against the will of the world, defying fire, bullets, and betrayal. And as cameras broadcasted across continents, one phrase spread on every tongue: Trump is speechless. But the silence was not just his. It was the silence of an old order watching something new take root. The silence of power confronted with a force it could not crush. The silence of a world realizing that the road of tires was no longer a construction. It was a revolution. The night had ended, but the war for meaning had just begun. Dawn broke heavy and gray, its first light falling across a battlefield that had once been a march of hope. Smoke still rose from piles of charred rubber. The air reeked of blood, fire, and exhaustion. Yet amid the wreckage, the road still stretched on, scarred but alive. Children slept on its surface, clutching pieces of tire as if they were blankets. Mothers sat in circles, nursing infants with nothing but hope left in their breasts. Soldiers stood guard, their uniforms torn, their faces streaked with ash but their eyes steady. Against every prediction, against every attack, the road remained. Word spread like wildfire. Messengers on motorbikes carried news across Burkina Faso. The road lives. Villagers abandoned their homes to see it with their own eyes. Some came barefoot, walking miles just to step on the rubber, to touch it as if it were sacred. They wept as their feet sank into the black surface, whispering prayers, leaving offerings of millet, salt, and water. The road had transcended construction. It had become a shrine. Abroad, the reaction was seismic. Newspapers printed headlines dripping with disbelief. Tire Road defiance continues. Analysts sat in brightly lit studios, their faces tight, their voices strained as they explained what could not be explained. This is unsustainable, they insisted. It cannot last. Yet every morning brought new images. More people marching, more tires laid, more voices rising in chants. The defiance was undeniable. Trump remained silent. For days, no statement left his lips. His aides prodded him, begged him to speak, but he only watched the footage replaying across screens. Children carrying tires, men rebuilding fire-scorched sections, women marching barefoot with torches. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the table, but no words came. For the first time, the man of endless boasts and jests found his tongue chained. Silence became his defeat. Within Burkina Faso, the defeat of the generals left a vacuum. Some fled into exile. Others disappeared into the forests. but their power was broken. Traoré stood before his people not as a soldier commanding troops, but as a leader born of fire and endurance. He did not proclaim victory. He did not boast. He simply stood upon the road, his voice heavy with the weight of nights survived, and said, "We have walked through fire. Now we must walk further." The words were plain, yet they resounded like prophecy. The road stretched further still. Villagers who had once doubted now came with tires on their backs. Farmers brought oxen to drag stacks of rubber across fields. Children turned games into labor, rolling tires for miles to deliver them to the builders. Even the old and frail contributed, weaving rope, fetching water, tending the wounded. The road was no longer his alone, it belonged to all. But hunger still stalked the land. Famine's shadow did not vanish with fire's smoke. Children still collapsed along the road, their tiny bodies unable to endure. Graves still dotted its edges, marked with silent tires. Traoré walked among them often, pausing before the fresh mounds, his head bowed, his lips moving in prayers unheard. Yet each time he rose again, his step unbroken, his silence carrying more weight than speeches. For his people saw in him not invincibility, but persistence, and persistence was all they needed. The IMF, furious, tried new measures. Assets frozen, accounts blocked, trade embargoes tightened, yet none of it mattered. The road had birthed a new economy, one not measured in gold or dollars but in movement, in solidarity, in sacrifice. Markets sprang up along its edges, where traders bartered food for labor, cloth for rubber, goats for grain. It was fragile, precarious, but it was alive. And life, in a land long strangled by despair, was victory enough. Other African nations watched. Some mocked, dismissing it as folly, but whispers grew in their streets. If Burkina Faso could resist, why not them? If tires could become a road, what else could become freedom? From Dakar to Kinshasa, from Nairobi to Harare, the image of Traoré, leading barefoot children along a black river of rubber spread like wildfire. Leaders scoffed in public but trembled in private. The road was not just in Burkina Faso anymore. It was in the minds of millions. The world's powers could not silence it. They tried propaganda, flooding the airwaves with stories of failure, disease, collapse. Yet each lie was drowned out by the sight of the road itself, growing mile by mile, rebuilt each time it was struck, immortal in its defiance. Foreign journalists who had once arrived to mock now stayed in awe, their pens trembling as they wrote of a people who refused to stop walking. And then came the moment that crystallized everything. A boy, no more than 7, barefoot and frail, was seen dragging a tire twice his size. He collapsed midway, his body too weak, but he refused to let go. Cameras captured it, his small hands bleeding, his face streaked with dust, his eyes burning with stubborn fire. Soldiers tried to lift the tire for him, but he pushed them away. He dragged it inch by inch until it reached the road. When he finally laid it down, he collapsed unconscious. The crowd erupted in tears. The image circled the globe within hours. If ever a single picture embodied defiance, it was that boy and his tire. In that moment, the question was no longer whether the road would succeed. The question was what it meant. Was it rebellion, a prayer, a curse? Or was it simply the birth of a new Africa? Traoré did not answer. Instead, he walked further, tire in hand, his shadow long against the dawn. He carried no crown, no robe, no scepter, only rubber, the symbol of a struggle the world could not comprehend. And so the road stretched beyond borders, beyond nations, beyond imagination. It did not matter how many miles it covered. What mattered was that it refused to end. For every burned section was rebuilt. For every grave another march arose. For every betrayal another oath was sworn. The road had become eternal, carved not into earth but into the souls of those who walked it. As the sun rose high, as chants rolled like thunder, as the black surface gleamed against the horizon, the world asked itself a question whispered in every language, from the villages of Africa to the skyscrapers of the West. Is this the moment Africa broke its chains? The road gave no answer. It only stretched onward, tire upon tire, carrying the footsteps of a people who refused to bow. And Ibrahim Traoré, scarred but unbroken, walked at its head, his silence louder than any speech, his persistence a prophecy that shook the world.